about austerity measures for what he thinks is the way forward after what has been witnessed in the country.
Budget lines providing for the operations of the office of the First Lady, the spouse of the Deputy President, and the Prime Cabinet Secretary will be removed. Similarly, the budget provisions for confidential budgets in various executive offices, including my own office, have been removed.
Alongside that, he also announced what he thinks should be done, because there's been questions about the public debt, which is really weighing down on the country's progress. He formed a forensic audit team.
This audit will provide the people of Kenya with clarity on the extent and nature of our debt, how public resources have been expended, and will also recommend proposals for managing our public debt in a manner that is sustainable and does not burden future generations.
So we'll be talking about that shortly, because the Law Society of Kenya has already indicated they will not be joining that team. But there's something else. Remember, the finance bill was expected to raise, well, the initial figure was 302 billion shillings. The president says it was supposed to raise 346 billion shillings. Now, that money will not be available, but he says to deal with that, there will be budget cuts of 177 billion shillings, and then the remainder will be borrowed. Listen to this.
Cutting the entire amount in our assessment would significantly and drastically affect the delivery of critical government services, while borrowing the whole amount in full will occasion a fiscal deficit by a margin that would have significant repercussions on many sectors, including our exchange rates and interest rates. Whatever we are going to borrow, the difference will increase our fiscal deficit from what I intended to be 3.3% of our GDP. It will now go up to 4.6% of GDP, still lower than last year, and will be used to fund some of our critical government services.
All right, so there could be some conflicting issues about the figures there, because if you are dealing with 346 billion shillings and you're cutting budget of 177 billion shillings, then the balance to be borrowed is 169 billion shillings. Currently, the deficit, as declared by the government, is 3.3% being of the GDP, being 597 billion shillings. The president says that with this gap to be borrowed, it will push the deficit to 4.6 billion shillings. I mean, 4.6%. But 169 billion shillings would not necessarily push it to that level, because 4.6% would indicate a deficit of 832 billion shillings. 597 billion shillings plus 169 billion shillings only adds up to 766 billion shillings. But you can talk about that later on. Mheshimiwa Ndishu, tell me, all these measures that the government is taking and the president is announcing, is it responding to the questions that have been raised by Kenyans, but also how do we survive? Because there has been a campaign against borrowing. Now again, we are here.
Sam, the question I've been asking myself and many other Kenyans asking themselves is, 60 years after independence, we have borrowed 12 trillion shillings. The debt that we owe, IMF, World Bank, and other lenders, 12 trillion shillings. Then one asks a question. Were we really ready to be given independence? And I was asking, maybe we give this country back to Britain, tell them to run it for us for 5-10 years, and return it to Kenyans debt-free. 12 trillion shillings. I mean, when the last governor of this country handed over to Jomo Kenyatta, I don't know the figures, but I doubt whether this country, under the British colonial rule, owed any debt to IMF or World Bank or whoever leaders. I don't know. Let me not say whether there was anything. But since Jomo Kenyatta took over, Daniel Moi, Mwai Kibaki, Uhuru Kenyatta, and now William Ruto, we owe 12 trillion shillings. And it is actually going up because we were told that the capping was 10 trillion. That was what was allowed by law. But now it has now gone through the roof to 12 trillion. By the time maybe President William Ruto will be going for another 3 years or 10 years, it will be 20 trillion. Meaning then we don't have a country that we call ourselves, we have mortgaged our country. Even you yourself, your children and children's children have been mortgaged. So when we see the president talking about these figures of trillion, billion, borrowing, why do we borrow? The answer is very simple. And that what we can stop doing, like in countries like Singapore, Malaysia, Hong Kong, Japan, South Korea, that in those countries, Sam and my fellow panelists here, there is nothing called corruption. Not a single cent can a government officer steal from government. I have been to Malaysia, I've been to Singapore, where somebody is arrested in the morning or yesterday for stealing government resources or even bribery, receiving a bribe, taken to the court at 9 a.m. in the morning, and by 2 o'clock he's hanged. That is the kind of discipline, and this is not only in Kenya, but the entire African context is about stealing, and about going to government is just to go and steal and involve oneself in corruption. I mean, the few people who are in government, and J.M. Karik talked about this 50 years ago, that 50 years to come, there will be about 50 million beggars and very few millionaires. The few people that have money in this country is more than 12 trillion shillings, meaning that you and I, we have been mortgaged, and there is nothing we can do, and that's why the GNZs now come in. The next thing our GNZs should do is to say that any money that will be borrowed from now, there must be public participation. The people of Kenya must allow government to borrow, but not somebody just wake up in the morning and say, we are going to borrow 200 billion. We are going to borrow 346 billion shillings for the deficit in the budget. So, Mr. Sam, we have got a problem in this country, but we know the problem is corruption, is theft of public resources. If it's exemplary. The people who are in government today, some of them are guys who have cases in courts. That's why I'm saying, well, you asked me earlier on whether I don't have confidence in our judiciary. Why did the judiciary allow people to be elected and nominated in government when we have got cases pending before court of corruption, of theft of public resources, and then we still continue as if everything is okay, it's normal, and then we continue now borrowing more as if this country belongs to somebody.
What would be the solution? The finance bill
the solution is simple.
Way.
The solution is simple, and I think from where I see it, and this is even what is in my paper's headline today, is that God has come to answer our problem, our question. He has brought guys who are now going to tell the government if anyone is caught stealing. And we could start even by telling the president, anyone that has got a pending case in court and he is serving his government, as a show of seriousness in this matter, he should be told to step aside until that matter is completed. But you cannot tell me that we are working for the government to look for resources for the government when I've got a case pending in court of money I stole from the government. I mean, there's a conflict of interest here.
There is in the public service or in the top level? Both
in the public service, both in the political realm.
Okay.
I mean, it's all there, Sam, and you don't have to ask me who they are. I mean, it's in the public domain. But what I would like to say is, the young people who have now come in the space and in our democratic space are God-sent. Because
Okay,
they are going to say
hear
no
that.
more. No
I
other
hear that.
person,
Honorable Ndishu,
no
I've given you
other
sufficient time
person
to
should be
respond to my
allowed to be
question.
nominated or
Yeah.
even elected as a member of parliament or even any position if he has got a pending corruption case
All right.
in court.
Let me look for an answer elsewhere. Fred, tell me, what should happen? Because the finance bill is out of the way.
Yes.
There's a gap that the president is talking about. They will cut 177 billion shillings. There remains 169 billion shillings that ideally should be borrowed. Is there a better way of dealing with it?
Thank you, Sam. You have actually interrogated the numbers, but you see, with this government, the numbers are always a moving target. We don't know what is what. But I'm happy that even the media are interrogating these numbers and putting them on the spot. But I must thank the Gen Zs, because the conversation they have started has made the government tone down on some areas. And the constitution of Kenya that we have today, Sam, is a very progressive constitution, because we have what is called the principles of public finance. If you look at those principles, prudent use of public resources is one of them. And if you tell me today that the president has just realized that the budgetary allocation to the office of the first lady, spouse of the deputy president, spouse of the prime cabinet secretary are not necessary, then they were not applying themselves to the principle of public finance. Number two, he has said that there are 47 state corporations with the duplicative roles that will be, dissolved. That is very good. But the president must now go ahead and look at the wage bill. Are there ghost workers in this government? If they are there, they should address that. They should go ahead and look at the salaries. Salaries and Remuneration Commission are mandated to ensure that they sustain the fiscal fiscal sustainability of whatever wage bill that we have, so that it is sustainable. They should also look at that and look at how much are they paying. I listened to the president and he said that he is willing to take a pay cut if that is what will make this country progress. We'd want to see the president take a pay cut. But I want to remind you, Sam, the people of Kenya, sometimes back through the NADCO, gave the recommendation, and they said that the issues of growth of the economy in the next 3 years will be sustained by, will be enhanced by cutting down on travels. And there was a proposal that 50% cut on the national executive, county executive, parliament, judiciary, and so on. Then the daily subsistence per diem, also cut by 30%. Then there was a proposal by the government that was made on 29th of June 2023, I think, on the delegation of those who travel. And then also there was a proposal on traveling economy, particularly when doing lesser hours, so that we don't see people traveling large, first class, just going to Uganda, you are traveling first class, delegation of 100, for example. That will not cut it. But I want to say that for proper management of our resources, we must ensure that we make use of our resources in a prudent manner. And lastly, Sam, we have also seen the public have told the president that you have a cabinet that is not serving you. Your cabinet has failed you. In fact, I remember sometimes back the president came out and acknowledged that he knows more than what other cabinet members know. It is time, with this Gen Z conversation, it is time the president not only cut down on the number, but also do away with the cabinet members that are perceived to be incompetent.
Okay.
If you have a threshold, maximum threshold in the Constitution of appointing 22, and those 22 have failed you, you have an opportunity to get 14 as a constitutional requirement that are having personal integrity, competent, and capable.
Right.
The people of Kenya want to see the president show some goodwill. The Gen Z have told him, you have done away with the finance bill, fair enough, but our issues are historical injustices. The president must also ensure that through the state, they comply with the provisions of Article 55 that require that the state must offer the young people certain services. For example, their participation in socio-economic development, offering them jobs, access to training and education. That is why these young people are crying. They are crying because they have been failed by the president. And who is the president? The president works together with the deputy and a cabinet. who took oath of office, an affirmation of faithfulness to the public, they have failed. Mr. President, your government has failed you, your cabinet has failed you. You promised the people of Kenya that shortly you will be looking at that cabinet. Kenyans are waiting. As you even prepare to sign the bill, IEBC, you said by tomorrow, we also want to see you dissolve that cabinet and constitute a cabinet that has the benefit and the confidence of the public of Kenya.
Indeed, he said that shortly he'll be making further changes. I'm just wondering why you impatient, or how short is short?
Shortly means, Oxford Dictionary definition, shortly means not in a long time.
Okay, we'll need to hear from the president. But Irungo, talk to me about, because again, austerity measures we've heard about this, I think since the former president was the Minister for Finance. That should be around 2009, 2010. You can correct me if I'm wrong. I could be. But so now, with these measures, stop the funding to the office of the First Lady and the spouses of the Deputy President, Prime Cabinet Secretary, cut the number of advisors by 50%, and many others that he enlisted there. But you still have to borrow that will have an effect or an impact on our standing with public debt. How does that work out? And how difficult is it for the president having to deal with a situation where the people have said you don't want that finance bill?
Yeah. So I think, first of all, let me just return to Mzee Dishu's point about maybe the British come back and run our economy just with a light touch. You know, the UK is the sixth...
Return to us debt-free.
Well, I don't think... Given their recent experience, I don't think it's possible at this point. I mean, we've just seen a new elected government in the UK. The UK is the sixth richest economy in the world, but it is also an economy in which something like about 10% of its population can't work because of bad health. That the health system has collapsed so much that actually 10% of the population just can't physically engage. 12% of the population are on welfare. Incomes have not changed in the last decade. So it's probably not a good example in terms of if we were to be colonized by anybody at this point.
Japanese?
Let's not be colonized. Maybe that's where we need to go there. Let me come back to this point about the finance bill. I think what started off as a tax revolt has now become a conversation about how taxes are being used. And we have to welcome that. And I think even in State House, in the Treasury, there has to be an appreciation that for the first time in several years, millions of Kenyans are now following something called the taxation bill, the appropriations bill, and so on.
Expenditure.
Yeah, and maybe let me just, because yesterday was Sunday, let me just say that, even, Luke 23:2 will tell us that Jesus Christ was actually tortured excruciatingly and was a victim of extrajudicial killings because he was accused of running a tax revolt. So for all the Christians out there and anybody who, takes inspiration from Christianity, it's important to say that actually engaging in taxation is critical for a country. And that is the expression of Article 1. I think the third point I wanted to say is that, numbers aside, and, I think what the president, that was probably my best president's speech out of all the ones that we have seen in the last 2 weeks, because I saw him beginning to regain balance. He beginning to speak to the concerns of those that are championing the third liberation. I think there are a number of things that the movement have called for. The first is that the structure of government is too bloated, it's too indulgent at a time like this. So it's not just the offices of the First Ladies, it's really looking at the structure of cabinet, the quality of cabinet, all the advisors, and I think to some extent the president went as far as he could in that initial statement, but I think, as we saw in, I think it was the Standard last week, a headline that said perhaps this is the last supper for the existing cabinet secretaries. I think we have to say that the cabinet ministry of secretaries was a terrible idea. How it was generated in a context where we were essentially not able to balance budgets is just unfathomable. So that's the first point. The second point is really around addressing corruption and wastage. It's not just about the refreshments, the travel costs, and the confidential budget. It's also being more transparent about the way that government uses public resources. And if we're saying that at this time we don't have a lot of public resources, then there has to be a bold approach to managing transparently figures. Let me just give you an example. Today's newspaper, front page of the Standard. There is reference to the conflict of interest bill. And I just want to say that for all those senators who are begging our forgiveness over the last week or so, they have to essentially withdraw the conflict of interest bill. If there is an indication of good faith on the part of parliamentarians, it has to be to remove the changes that essentially have mutilated this bill to a point that actually it is now a conflict of interest bill. It is not even an anti-conflict of interest bill. It is one that actually perpetuates theft, graft,
You're
and
referring to the Daily Nation, right?
Yeah.
That is the Daily Nation, for viewers. The third point I think that Gen Z and the Third Liberation activists have called for, and I saw a very good action plan that was released on Friday. And of course, because the Gen Z movement is so leaderful, we're not sure which part of the movement this came from, but it had some good ideas. Let me just speak to it a little bit. The third area was around lowering the tax burden on Kenyans. Right, particularly those that are paying taxes. What started as a progressive taxation approach has now generated into a tax everything approach. Consumption, production, the next thing would be a tax on breathing clean air or something like that. We also have to recognize that the young folks have told us that they want to see greater services. They want to see employment of teachers, particularly the junior school interns. Today there is potentially a strike or a protest that has been called by medical interns. We hope that it will be peaceful. It will be allowed to essentially approach Afia House to present their petition. And we have to say that, that's what Kenyans want. Kenyans want investment in agriculture. They want investments in health and education particularly. They want investment in jobs for Kenyans, not to have Kenyans have to go abroad in order to be employed, but to be employed in their own country. In fact, coming back to Dishu's point, we don't want Kenyans to go and work in Britain. Okay. Right? We want Kenyans to work here. It's a very simple action plan. And I think the thing we have to say to the president is, please do not manage this moment by commission. Do not set up a series of commissions that are temporal, expensive, and will essentially drag this country for another 3 to 6 months in terms of the actions that need to be taken. Please take the executive, use the executive power that you have to take the actions that are required.
Okay, and I want to tie this conversation with something that happened. I'll get to you, Honorable Sossion. Something that happened in Mathira yesterday. Let's listen to the Deputy President speaking about some things that have been happening over the past few days.
If you allow overzealous officers at Harambee House with a political scheme to interfere with this war against illicit rule, those people, those officers will set you up against the people.
So that's the Deputy President speaking to the President from Madeira. Let's listen to the spouse of the Deputy President, what she said in reference to some budget cuts to her office.
How can it be that somebody somewhere decides to take us back where we have come from? Apana. No, this thing must stop. And I will not stop because of a budget. I believe that we can raise this money ourselves.
We can raise this money ourselves. So, Honorable Sossion, please help us to tie all these things together, because in the end, the stability of our country has also to depend on how stable the government is or the administration is and how cohesive it is. We don't appear to see that. And the president is making certain pronouncements of what should happen. He's also promising there'll be further changes shortly. Yet, we still see this sort of infighting.
I think I should focus more on the stability of the economy. The stability of the economy is everything. It is what guarantees the social and political stability. And the state of the country in terms of borrowing has gone too far. And I think the president was very clear, and he warned Kenyans that we must take the country out of the debt distress, which of course he's done it fairly well. And there are two things here. Raising revenue to finance the budget. And if we get back to what Kibaki did, was strengthening the revenue collection domestically, that we were able to finance our budget at 95%. But now if we are talking about not collecting revenue so that we can borrow to finance the budget, I don't think that is the right direction. And the president meant very well with the finance bill that we should be able to enhance revenue collection so that we can finance our own program, both the development and the recurrent. Look at, for example, employment of 46,000 teachers. That is not a small number for an economy to do it. Employment of intern doctors and also rolling out the universal health care. Those are two key social services that must be provided for the people for free. And the president has been very, very, very clear about it. If you look at the tax collection to GDP ratio, currently we are doing at 14%, and many countries are doing 22%. And we needed to move up gradually to 22%. And what the Gen Zs are raising really is not very much about the finance bill. The finance bill has been an innocent document that has been linked. The key concern is how we spend, the corruption, the extravagance. And I think the president was very firm by rejecting the finance bill, and not just rejecting all the clauses and guiding Kenyans to the austerity measures. I am aware the Treasury has issued guidelines to all line ministries on what to ignore and what to delete in the financial programs. That of course includes doing away with funding some officers that are not necessary, doing away with the CS officers, no more purchase of new cars, and there are many programs. It's very long, but the president has been very clear about what to protect. Employment of teachers shall go on. Employment of intern doctors shall go on. The president has made it very clear.
Through borrowing.
The key critical
recurrent expenditure
programs.
Through borrowing.
And the austerity measures is going to reduce close to 170 billion of what was envisaged to be raised by the finance bill that has been withdrawn. And the balance, the president said, will be made through borrowing.
That's what I'm saying. We are not borrowing to finance recurrent expenditure.
The advice from the president and the position was very clear that we need to get the country out of the debt distress. That is why there was need for us to raise
are you hearing me? I'm saying
yes.
that the president is saying we will borrow to finance certain operations which are actually recurrent expenditure.
Recurrent expenditure.
Some. The finance bill 2023 will continue operating. It will raise revenue. That's a fact for sure. And it has been doing at 2.3 trillion. And any deficit shall be made through borrowing of the different programs across the board. So we cannot get into the details that, of course,
you just
18 billion.
Enumerated.
The Treasury.
Sorry,
let
me read what you were saying. You just enumerated some of the operations that will be financed through the borrowing: hiring of junior secondary school teachers, medical interns, funding the mixed stabilization program for dairy farmers, reviving our stalled roads program, retaining the fertilizer subsidy program, settling the debts owed to farmers in the coffee subsector. Some of those.
Yes, the president was very specific about what needs to be retained and what needs to be financed, and which is what you have listed. That in spite of the withdrawal of the finance bill and borrowing to finance the deficit of the budget, these programs will continue to be financed. The president is very firm about it, including dealing with programs within the agricultural sector. But then the fact of the matter is, as a country, with this conversation of the Gen Zs, now we need to look at our economy very openly and going into the future. If really we are going to deal with corruption, deal with wastage, no Kenyan will refuse to pay taxes. Those are facts that we need to look at going into the future. The president appointed a task force,
which the LSK has said.
The LSK is not the court. The LSK, they have freedom to object the way they do. The task forces are very legitimate in law. the Commission of Inquiries, they're allowed in law. And if indeed, looking at the expenditures in the past, the wage bill, what you call the pending bills, running into billions, are they genuine? Some of them, are they genuine?
Let me ask you. Let me ask
and therefore, even the task force itself.
The mandate of the task force is squarely on public debt.
Yes.
It doesn't talk about the pending bills. Never mind their debt.
Yes, it's on
but
public.
Don't you think Article 229 of the Constitution, which talks about the Office of the Auditor General and very specific on public debt, don't you think it suffices to deal with that question?
Now, why are Commission of Inquiries and task forces appointed?
That is not the question I'm asking.
Despite the existence of such
don't
bodies.
you think that the Office of the Auditor General, which is an independent office under the Constitution, is sufficient to deal with the questions of how accurate is our public debt?
Now that we have got public debt that we are not very sure, then it put questions to the Office of the Comptroller and Auditor General. Therefore,
and did you know that the Office of the Auditor General reports to Parliament?
Correct.
This task force will report to the President.
yes. Correct. Yeah, you look at it this way.
Yeah.
All task forces are always appointed when there are extreme serious issues that need to be addressed administratively.
Issues
and
that are
it is
bigger
done.
than
Yes,
constitutional office.
Yes, like the Presidential Working Party on Education, it has been conducted and there's been a report. It gives recommendation. And of course, there are terms of reference on this one of the wage bill. Not just the wage bill, but the public debt.
Yep.
Public debt is the biggest issue in this country. And it needs to be examined deeply. And if you look at the composition of the task force, they are made up of experts who will give a second...
So assuming the task force is formed and it comes up with a report and they give it to the President, what do you think?
Always in this country, we are not new in this country, the recommendations of the task forces have always guided in serious administrative action in remedying certain issues. Of course, it will operate within terms of reference.
Answer Sam's question.
So what would you do with that?
No, you're not
let's answer his question. Because you're going around it.
The recommendations will always be implemented. And in fact, the Comptroller and Auditor General will furnish information to the task force. And other
the reason I'm asking that, Honorable Session, the Constitution, Article 229 talks of, again...
2294G.
Yes, 4G, the public debt is also a mandate of the Auditor General, who is supposed to submit, audit reports shall be submitted to Parliament or the relevant county assembly. And within 3 months after receiving an audit report, Parliament or the county assembly shall debate and consider the report and take appropriate action.
Correct.
So if there is a report of the forensic audit of the public debt to the President, what does he do with it? Constitutionally?
All constitutional and legally speaking, all recommendations from the task forces, from the Commission of Inquiries, will guide in the administrative action and will even guide in the legislation. So there is nothing wrong with having an extra body or an entity of this nature carrying out what we call forensic audit of the public debt. We need an independent body to examine this.
Independent body beyond the Auditor General. Let's take a look at the feedback that has come to us at Citizen TV Kenya. At Sam Gichuku, the hashtag to use the Citizen Daybreak on the concerns this morning. What's your name? Ari. What happened in Kenya is so unfortunate. We should diffuse rather than fueling and ignoring the situation. Our guests should tell us how we will build our country, not reminding us what happened in Kenya. Franco Rinde, police failed in their duty of protecting peaceful demonstrations and instead allowed hired goons to wreak havoc. This kind of behavior can't be allowed to continue. Police should be held accountable for their actions. Clement Korim, the police should undergo mental health assessment in their training to be qualified. The erratic behavior of some of them raises eyebrows whether they are mentally fit to hold a gun. Gabi Wakasiaka, well, I think we read this earlier on. Let's move to the next one. Jim Rose, you're saying that this country is a cow that doesn't dry up, keeps producing milk even when hungry. Kenyans continue paying taxes even when the economy is unfavorable, but we don't value for our money due to corruption. Stop corruption, Mr. President. And being Mugala, you're saying that most things will work when the constitution will be upheld, respected and implemented. The government of the day should stop mutilating it. All these independent institutions and arms of government should be strengthened and play their roles. Now, it's 1 minute after 8 o'clock. I want to thank all of you because our time is up. Honorable Stephen Disho, I can see the disappointment on your face. Honorable Wilson Sosion, I know what 1 minute will mean. Fred Okango and Irungu Houghton. Oh, Houghton. Houghton. Okay, thank you so much.
Although Inoro yesterday called me Urungu. That Kikuyu I've never had.
All right.
I think we should.
Thank you so much for your time to have this conversation. It continues, and we'll touch a bit of it tomorrow on Daybreak. But Sporty Monday is up next. My name is Sam Gituku. See you again some other time.